Rain poured heavily that July afternoon in Boston, as if the sky was also mourning the loss of Martha Wilson. Sarah watched the droplets stream down the window of Mr. Peterson's office, her grandmother's attorney for over 30 years. Her fingers drummed nervously on the leather armchair as she waited for the other family members to arrive. She had just turned 32, and the last 10 years of her life had been entirely dedicated to caring for her grandmother. The polished mahogany of the conference room gleamed under the soft lighting, a stark contrast to the stormy darkness outside. Sarah's reflection in the window looked gaunt, with dark circles under her eyes, the unmistakable signs of grief mixed with exhaustion. 10 years of caregiving had taken their toll, physically and emotionally. Her once vibrant brown hair was now streaked with premature gray, hastily pulled back into a messy ponytail. She hadn't had time to get it properly cut in months. Sarah checked her watch, 2:45 p.m. The reading was scheduled for 3 now. As if on cue, the sound of the door opening made her turn. It was her cousin Jason, accompanied by his wife Tiffany, both impeccably dressed in black, as if they had rehearsed the moment. Jason wore an expensive suit that Sarah recognized from social media, another luxury purchase from his carefree life in Los Angeles. Tiffany's designer handbag probably cost more than Sarah's entire wardrobe. Jason hadn't shown up at the funeral. He hadn't even called when Martha had her last hospitalization. Now, he was there, with a serious and composed expression, as if grief was consuming him. The performance was almost believable, except for the hint of anticipation in his eyes. "Sarah," he greeted dryly, choosing seats on the other side of the room. "Jason, I thought you were still in Los Angeles," Sarah replied, unable to hide the irony in her tone. "The last time you called Grandma was Christmas, 2018. Tiffany adjusted her pearl necklace and pretended not to hear, occupying herself with her phone. The pearls looked new. Real ones, not the costume jewelry Sarah could afford. Sarah knew that type of complicit silence well. It was the same one her Aunt Barbara, Jason's mother, maintained on the phone when she called asking for news about her mother, but never offering to help with her care. The memories flooded back. The countless times Sarah had called Barbara, desperate for just a weekend of relief. "I'm sorry, dear. We have plans," had been the perpetual excuse. Plans that never included visiting Martha. The door opened again. This time, it was her Aunt Barbara, followed by her husband Richard and their youngest daughter Ashley, all three with perfectly rehearsed solemn expressions. Barbara's designer dress and freshly styled hair made Sarah acutely conscious of her own wrinkled blouse, the only black top she owned that was remotely appropriate for the occasion. Sarah felt a lump in her throat. That same aunt who had visited Martha only twice in 10 years was now there, probably already calculating how much the Upper East Side apartment would be worth. The apartment where Sarah had spent countless nights sleeping on a pull-out sofa, ready to respond to her grandmother's calls for help. "Sarah, dear." Barbara approached for a hug that Sarah received stiffly. Barbara's expensive perfume was overwhelming. "How are you holding up?" "Surviving," she answered dryly. "Like I have for the last 10 years, when I took care of your mother by myself." The words hung in the air, sharp and accusatory. Barbara's smile faltered slightly before she recovered, patting Sarah's arm condescendingly. "Well, we're all here now, aren't we?" she said, as if her presence at the will reading somehow made up for years of absence. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Mr. Peterson, sensing the tension, cleared his throat and indicated that everyone should be seated. At 65, with gray hair and a demeanor that had witnessed many similar will readings, he commanded the room's attention. His pinstriped suit and horn-rimmed glasses gave him an air of authority that momentarily calmed Sarah's racing heart. "Thank you all for being here," he began, opening a brown leather folder on the mahogany desk. "We're here for the reading of Mrs. Martha Wilson's will, according to her express wishes before her passing." Sarah felt her heart race. Not that she was there for the money or possessions, she thought. What really mattered was recognition. 10 years abandoning her own life to care for her grandmother had to mean something. Her mind drifted to what those 10 years had cost her. Her promising career at the publishing house, gone. Her relationship with Eric, who couldn't understand why she couldn't join him for even a weekend getaway. Over. Her master's degree in English literature, abandoned halfway through. Her friends gradually drifted away as she declined invitation after invitation. 10 years sleeping on a sofa bed in her grandmother's room to attend to her nighttime needs. 10 years managing medications, appointments, baths, feeding. 10 years during which her own apartment in Somerville had become merely a storage space for memories of a life she no longer lived. Sarah recalled the night Martha had first shown signs of needing full-time care. It had been raining then too, a fierce storm that had knocked out the power in Martha's building. Sarah had received a panicked call from her grandmother, who couldn't remember where she kept her flashlight or how to light the emergency candles. When Sarah arrived, soaking wet from the 3-block sprint from the subway, she found Martha sitting in the dark, crying like a lost child. That night, Sarah had made the decision to move in, initially thinking it would be temporary. But temporary had stretched into a decade. Mr. Peterson put on his glasses and began to read. "I, Martha Wilson, of sound mind, declare this to be my last will and testament." Sarah observed her family member's posture. Jason leaned forward, like a predator ready to pounce. Barbara tried to maintain an expression of sadness, but her eyes gleamed in anticipation. Ashley didn't even pretend, checking her phone under the table, probably already researching how much her portion of the inheritance might be worth. The apartment alone was worth at least $2.1 million in today's market, a pre-war gem on the Upper East Side with original crown moldings and a view of Central Park that real estate agents would describe as partial, but was breathtaking nonetheless. Sarah knew every inch of that apartment, every creaky floorboard, every stubborn window that needed just the right touch to open, every corner where dust gathered despite her best efforts. "I leave my Upper East Side apartment, valued at $2.1 million to my grandson, Jason Wilson Carter." The room froze. Sarah felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. She must have heard wrong. Jason, who had visited maybe 5 times in 10 years? Who complained about the old person smell when he did visit? Who couldn't be bothered to call on Martha's birthdays? "My beach house in Cape Cod to my daughter Barbara Wilson Carter." Another blow. The beach house that Martha had loved so dearly, where Sarah had taken her for weekend getaways when her health still permitted, pushing her wheelchair along the sandy paths so she could feel the ocean breeze on her face. Barbara had declined every invitation to join them at the beach house, claiming she wasn't a beach person, though her social media was filled with photos from tropical vacations. Sarah looked at Mr. Peterson, hoping for some kind of explanation in his eyes, but the attorney maintained a neutral expression as he continued reading. "My jewelry collection, including the family heirlooms, to my granddaughter Ashley Wilson Carter." The pearls that Martha had promised would be Sarah's someday. The diamond earrings that had been in the family for generations. The sapphire ring that Martha's husband had given her on their 50th anniversary. All going to Ashley, who had once mockingly called her great-grandmother the fossil when she thought no one could hear. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. It was like being in a nightmare, the kind where you want to scream but no sound comes out. Her eyes began to water as she tried to process what was happening. My investments, valued at approximately $950,000, to be divided equally between my daughter Barbara and my grandson Jason." Each word cut deeper than the last. Sarah remembered the sleepless nights checking her grandmother's blood sugar, the endless afternoons in the emergency room, the birthdays she missed, the boyfriends who left her because she had no time for anything beyond caring for Martha. She remembered the Christmas Eve 3 years ago when Martha had pneumonia, and Sarah had spent the holiday in a hospital chair, holding her grandmother's frail hand while machines beeped around them. Barbara had sent a text. "Merry Christmas. We're in Aspen. The snow is amazing. Give Mom our love." That same Barbara was now receiving $500,000. As for my granddaughter, Sarah Wilson Evans. Finally, her name. Sarah held her breath, clinging to a last hope. Perhaps there was some explanation. Perhaps Martha had left her something meaningful, not because of its monetary value, but because it acknowledged the love and care Sarah had given so freely. I leave the sum of $10,000 and my set of English porcelain, in gratitude for the care provided in recent years. The world seemed to collapse around her. $10,000 in porcelain. 10 years of dedication were worth that. Meanwhile, those who barely asked about Martha's health were inheriting millions. Sarah felt her face burn with humiliation as she saw the poorly disguised smile on Jason's lips and Barbara's triumphant look. Ashley was already on the phone, probably sharing the news with someone. There must be some mistake, Sarah finally managed to say, her voice trembling. Grandma, she wouldn't do this to me. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Sarah. The will was made 6 months ago, and Mrs. Wilson was of sound mind when she signed it. 6 months? But she couldn't even… Sarah stopped, remembering an afternoon when Barbara unexpectedly appeared and insisted on taking Martha out for some fresh air. They returned 3 hours later, with her grandmother exhausted and confused. The rain intensified outside, becoming as violent as the storm forming inside Sarah. 10 years. 10 years of her life slipping through her fingers like the water now running down the office windows. Come, dear, said Barbara, rising with a smile poorly disguised as compassion. I know it's difficult, but we must respect Mother's wishes. Sarah raised her eyes, meeting Barbara's gaze. In that moment, she understood everything. The previous will, the sudden visit, the triumphant smiles. She had been manipulated, betrayed, robbed, not just of material possessions, but of something far more valuable, recognition of her sacrifice. This isn't over, said Sarah, rising with trembling hands. This isn't about money. It's about justice. As the rain continued to fall mercilessly over Boston, Sarah left the room, leaving behind not only the family who had betrayed her, but also a part of herself that would never be the same again. The elevator ride to the lobby felt endless. Sarah's mind raced with questions, with memories, with rage. How could her grandmother have done this? The woman who had raised her after her parents died in that car accident when she was 12. The woman who had sat through every school play, who had helped her apply to colleges, who had been more mother than grandmother. When the elevator doors opened, Sarah stumbled into the building's ornate lobby, barely seeing the polished marble floors and brass fixtures through her tears. Outside, the rain continued unabated. She had no umbrella. She'd forgotten it in Mr. Peterson's office. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered now. She stepped into the downpour, letting the cold water soak through her clothes, mingling with her tears. 3 blocks later, thoroughly drenched, she finally hailed a taxi. Where to? The driver asked, eyeing her dripping form with concern. Sarah gave her address in Somerville, then leaned back against the seat, closing her eyes. The taxi smelled of artificial pine and cigarettes, a jarring contrast to the lavender sachets Martha had always tucked into her drawers. Martha had hated artificial scents. Life has enough real smells, she used to say. Why add fake ones? The memory brought fresh tears. Sarah had spent the last decade learning all of Martha's preferences, her habits, her needs. She knew which nightgown was Martha's favorite, the blue flannel one with tiny white flowers, which tea she preferred on cold mornings, Earl Grey with a splash of milk, no sugar, which television programs made her laugh, old episodes of I Love Lucy and The Golden Girls. What had it all been for? When the taxi pulled up to her apartment building, Sarah paid the driver and stepped out into the rain again, which had finally begun to let up. The 3-story brick building looked just as she had left it that morning, utterly ordinary, completely unchanged. How strange that the world could continue as normal when her entire life had just imploded. Sarah's small apartment in Somerville was exactly as she had left it 3 years ago, when she decided to move permanently into her grandmother's home. A thin layer of dust covered the furniture, giving the place an air of abandonment that perfectly reflected how she felt. She dropped her keys on the kitchen table and sank into the couch, finally allowing her tears to flow uncontrollably. The apartment felt like a time capsule. Framed photographs on the walls showed a younger, happier Sarah, at her college graduation with Martha beaming proudly beside her, on a hiking trip with friends, at a publishing house party when she'd gotten her first promotion. That Sarah was gone now, replaced by a woman who had given everything and received nothing in return. 10 years. 10 years given body and soul to someone who, in the end, didn't recognize her sacrifice. The words of the will echoed in her mind like a cruel mantra. $10,000 in porcelain, as if she were a maid receiving a generous tip, not a granddaughter who gave up her youth, career, and relationships to be a full-time caregiver. She thought of the English porcelain set, 12 place settings of delicate bone china with hand-painted roses that Martha had inherited from her own mother. Sarah had always admired it, yes, but she'd never coveted it. What would she even do with it in this tiny apartment with barely enough cabinet space for her everyday dishes? Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Melissa, her best friend since college days, one of the few people who remained in her life despite her lack of time for meetings and celebrations. Melissa had understood when Sarah canceled plans, had visited when Sarah couldn't leave Martha, had listened to Sarah's fears and frustrations without judgment. So, how did it go? Asked Melissa, her voice heavy with concern. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to control her crying. They got everything, Mel. Everything. The apartment, the beach house, the jewelry, the investments, everything went to people who were never there for her. What? That can't be. Your grandmother adored you. I thought so too. Sarah stood up and went to the window, watching the rain that was still falling. I got $10,000 and a porcelain set. 10 years of my life for $10,000, not even minimum wage per year. The silence on the other end of the line revealed Melissa's shock. Sarah, this doesn't make sense. Your grandmother was lucid. She knew everything you did for her. In the last few months, she was more confused. I think they took advantage of that. Sarah felt a wave of nausea as she verbalized the suspicion growing in her mind. Barbara took her out one afternoon, about 6 months ago. They came back late and Grandma was strange, tired. The will was signed that day. She remembered how disoriented Martha had been that evening, how she had kept asking where Sarah was, even though Sarah was right beside her, how she had refused dinner, saying she wasn't hungry, then woken up at midnight starving. Sarah had made her toast and tea, helping her shaking hands hold the cup. You think they manipulated your grandmother into changing her will? I'm almost certain. Sarah felt anger replacing sadness. Jason barely called on her birthday. Ashley didn't even bother to call. And now they own everything. You need to contest this, Melissa said firmly. You can't let them take advantage like this. Sarah ran her hand through her hair, exhausted. How? I'll need a lawyer, evidence, and with what? I have $10,000. She laughed bitterly. I can't even pay a retainer with that. My cousin Michael is a lawyer, remember? I can talk to him. I'm sure he can at least advise you. A slight glimmer of hope emerged amid the despair. Michael specialized in civil law and had gained notoriety for handling some complicated inheritance dispute cases. Thanks, Mel. I don't know what I'd do without you. That's what friends are for. I'm coming over. You shouldn't be alone right now. I'll bring wine and Chinese food, lots of both. After hanging up, Sarah went to the bathroom and stared at her reflection in the mirror. The tired face, the swollen eyes from crying, the hair that hadn't been cut in months showed a woman who had forgotten herself while caring for someone else. At 32, she looked 40. When had she stopped being Sarah, full of dreams and plans, to become just the caregiver granddaughter? She splashed cold water on her face, trying to wash away the tears, the shock, the betrayal. As she reached for a towel, her eyes fell on a small framed photograph on the bathroom shelf. Her and Martha on Sarah's 22nd birthday, just before Sarah had graduated college. They were both laughing, arms around each other, frosting from the birthday cake somehow smeared on both their noses. I promise I'll fight for you, Grandma, Sarah whispered to the photograph. For the real you, not whoever signed that will. The sound of the doorbell pulled her from her thoughts. It was too early for Melissa to have arrived. When Sarah opened the door, she found Mr. Johnson, her 72-year-old neighbor who had always taken care of her plants during her absences. Sarah, my dear, I heard about your grandmother's passing. I brought some banana bread and wanted to see how you're doing. Mr. Johnson had been a professor of English literature before retiring, the field Sarah had abandoned her studies in. His kind eyes and gentle manner had made him something of a surrogate grandfather to her over the years. The old man's kindness brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. She invited him in, and while preparing coffee, told him about the will. "You know what hurts the most, Mr. Johnson? It's not the money itself. It's feeling like all the love I gave meant nothing, like I was invisible." Mr. Johnson shook his head, indignant. "That's not right, child. Your grandmother wouldn't do this if she were in her right mind. You gave up your life for her." "Exactly," Sarah exclaimed, spilling some coffee on the counter. "I quit my job at the publishing house because I couldn't balance both. I broke up with Eric because he couldn't understand why I couldn't travel even on holidays. I left my master's program unfinished." The words came out like a torrent that had been dammed up for too long. "And for what? To watch Jason, who lives in Los Angeles on his father's dime, inherit the apartment while I have nowhere to go." She remembered how excited she'd been when she'd been promoted to junior editor at age 24, the youngest in the company's history. How proud Martha had been, taking Sarah out to a fancy dinner to celebrate. 2 years later, when Martha's health began to decline, Sarah had tried to balance her career with caregiving. But the midnight calls, the emergency room visits, the doctor's appointments that could only be scheduled during work hours had made it impossible. Her boss had been understanding at first, but patience had worn thin as deadlines were missed, and Sarah's attention was divided. "I remember when you got that promotion," Mr. Johnson said, as if reading her thoughts. "Your grandmother came over here specifically to tell me about it." She was bursting with pride. "She was?" Sarah hadn't known that. "Oh, yes. Said you were the smartest girl in the whole publishing house, and they were lucky to have you." He sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "That's why this doesn't add up. The Martha Wilson I met wouldn't have left you with just porcelain and a pittance after all you did." Mr. Johnson listened patiently as Sarah continued to vent, nodding. "What are you going to do now?" "Fight," Sarah said, surprising herself with her determination. "I need to prove they manipulated her." "Good girl." Mr. Johnson squeezed her hand. "Your grandmother raised you to stand up for what's right. Don't let them take that from you, too." After Mr. Johnson left, promising to bring more banana bread the next day, Sarah sat alone at her kitchen table, staring at her phone. She scrolled through old photos, hundreds of them, documenting the last decade with Martha. Martha on her 80th birthday, blowing out candles with Sarah's help. Martha in her wheelchair at the beach, a wide smile on her face as seagulls circled overhead. Martha and Sarah at Christmas, wearing matching red sweaters that Sarah had bought as a joke, but Martha had insisted on wearing. These weren't the photos of a woman who would willingly cut her primary caregiver, her granddaughter, her only close family, out of her will. These were photos of love, of connection, of gratitude. Sarah's phone pinged with a text from Melissa. "Michael can meet tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. at Cafe Nero downtown. He says bring any documentation you have." A spark of determination ignited in Sarah's chest. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That night, after Melissa had gone home, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her dusty bedroom, her mind racing with memories, with plans, with questions. Why had Martha changed her will? Had she really been of sound mind, as Mr. Peterson claimed? What had Barbara said to her during that mysterious outing 6 months ago? Around 3 a.m., Sarah got up and began to sort through the boxes she'd brought from Martha's apartment after her death. Personal papers, photographs, cards. She was looking for something, anything, that might help her case. In the third box, she found a leather-bound journal, Martha's diary from the past year. Sarah had bought it for her, encouraging her to write down her thoughts as a way to combat the confusion that was becoming more frequent. With trembling hands, Sarah opened it. Most entries were short, sometimes just a few words. "Sunny today. Sarah made pot roast. Doctor appointment. New pills make me tired. Watched Jeopardy. Got 3 answers right." But then, on a date 6 months ago, the very day Barbara had taken Martha out, there was a longer entry, the handwriting shaky but legible. "Barbara came today. She took me to a lawyer's office. Something about a will. I'm confused. I told her Sarah should have the apartment. I promised it to her. Barbara said Sarah doesn't need it, that she's using me for my money. That can't be right. Sarah takes care of me. She loves me. I'm so tired. Can't think straight. Barbara says I should sign the papers. She says Sarah has been stealing my medication. That can't be right. I'm so confused. Where is Sarah? I need Sarah. Sarah's hands shook as she read the words. Here it was. Evidence of manipulation, of confusion, of exploitation. She hugged the journal to her chest, tears streaming down her face. I'm here, Grandma, she whispered. I'm still here. The next morning, Sarah met with Michael, Melissa's cousin, at a small cafe in downtown Boston. He was younger than she expected, probably in his mid-30s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put Sarah at ease. He wore a casual button-down shirt rather than a suit, and his easy smile contrasted with the serious way he reviewed the documents Sarah had brought: Martha's medical records, the diary, photographs documenting her care. So, your grandmother changed her will 6 months ago, leaving almost everything to family members who barely visited her. Michael summarized after hearing Sarah's story. Yes, and I'm certain my Aunt Barbara had something to do with it. She suddenly showed up after months without visiting, took Grandma out for the afternoon, and that's when the will was signed. Michael nodded, taking notes. And before this new will, was there another one? Yes. Grandma had told me years ago that she'd take care of me in her will because of everything I was doing for her. She even showed me a copy once. The apartment was supposed to be mine, and the rest was to be divided equally. She remembered that day clearly. It had been about 3 years ago, shortly after Sarah had moved in permanently. Martha had called her into the bedroom, patting the space beside her on the bed. I want to show you something, Martha had said, pulling a document from her nightstand drawer. I've updated my will. The apartment will be yours when I'm gone, Sarah. It's the least I can do after all you've given up for me. Sarah had protested, saying she wasn't caring for Martha because of any expectation of inheritance. Martha had taken her hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so frail. I know that, dear. That's exactly why you deserve it. The others only call when they want something. You're here every day, giving me the greatest gift, your time. Do you have a copy of that previous will? Michael's question brought Sarah back to the present. Sarah shook her head. No, I never thought I'd need it. I trusted her. Michael sighed. That complicates things, but doesn't make them impossible. To contest a will, we need to prove either that your grandmother wasn't of sound mind when she signed it, or that she was under undue influence. She was definitely not herself in those last months. The dementia was getting worse. Did her doctor diagnose her with dementia? Do you have medical records? Yes. Dr. Reynolds diagnosed her with early-stage Alzheimer's about 8 months before she died. I have all her medical records. She'd been the one to notice the first signs. Martha forgetting small things, getting confused about dates, repeating the same stories. At first, Sarah had attributed it to normal aging. But when Martha had put her house slippers in the refrigerator and become agitated when she couldn't find them, Sarah had known it was time to see a doctor. The diagnosis had been devastating but not surprising. Early-stage Alzheimer's, the doctor had said. Martha could continue to live a relatively normal life with proper care, but the condition would progress, and it had, slowly at first, then more rapidly in the final months. Michael's expression brightened slightly as he reviewed the medical records. This is good. The diagnosis predates the new will. That gives us something to work with. We'll also need to gather evidence about Barbara's sudden appearance and the circumstances of that day. And the doorman at Grandma's building might remember something. He always kept an eye on who came and went. Perfect. And what about your grandmother's doctor? Would he testify about her mental state? I think so. He was always concerned about her making important decisions without me present. Dr. Reynolds had been Martha's physician for over a decade. He had seen firsthand how devoted Sarah was to her grandmother's care. At their last appointment, just weeks before Martha's death, he had taken Sarah aside. You're doing an incredible job, he had told her. Most people would have put her in a facility years ago. The quality of life you've given her, that's immeasurable. For the first time since the will reading, Sarah felt a spark of hope. Perhaps she could fight this injustice after all. There's one more thing, Sarah said, pulling Martha's journal from her bag. I found this last night. It's my grandmother's diary. Look at the entry from the day the will was signed. Michael read the shaky handwriting, his expression growing serious. This is extremely valuable evidence, Sarah. It directly speaks to both her mental state and the manipulation. So we have a case? We definitely have a case, but I have to be honest with you, Michael said, leaning forward. These cases are difficult and expensive. The burden of proof is on us, and your family will fight tooth and nail to keep what they've inherited. I don't care how long it takes. They can't get away with this. Then let's get started. I'll take your case on contingency. If we win, I'll take a percentage. If we lose, you won't owe me anything. Sarah felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Thank you, Michael. You don't know what this means to me. I think I do, he said quietly. My own grandmother had Alzheimer's. My parents were her primary caregivers. I saw firsthand what that kind of devotion costs, and what it's worth. As they left the cafe, Sarah noticed a text message from a number she didn't recognize. I heard about what happened. We need to talk. Meet me tomorrow at 3 p.m. at Riverside Park. Emma. Emma? Sarah couldn't immediately place the name, but then it clicked. Emma was her grandmother's caregiver during the days when Sarah had to run errands or catch up on sleep. They hadn't spoken since Martha's funeral. What could she possibly want to talk about? As Sarah walked home, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions: grief, anger, betrayal, but now also a glimmer of hope. The fight ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since the will reading, she felt a sense of purpose. She would not let Barbara, Jason, and Ashley erase her decade of devotion. She would not let them rewrite Martha's story, or her own. That evening, Sarah found herself standing outside Martha's apartment building on the Upper East Side. She hadn't planned to come here. Her feet had simply carried her to the place that had been her home for the past decade. The elegant pre-war building with its awning and uniformed doorman seemed different now, as if it belonged to another life. "Miss Sarah," the doorman, Eduardo, exclaimed when he saw her. "I am so sorry about your grandmother. She was a wonderful lady." "Thank you, Eduardo." Sarah managed a small smile. "I miss her. We all do. She always had a kind word for everyone." He hesitated, then added, "I heard about the will reading yesterday. Mr. Jason was here this morning with some designers, talking about renovations." Sarah felt her heart constrict. "Already? It's been less than a week since she died." Eduardo nodded, looking uncomfortable. "He said something about gutting the place, making it more modern. I couldn't help overhearing. The thought of Jason ripping out the crown moldings that Martha had loved, replacing the vintage clawfoot tub with something sleek and contemporary, painting over the soft blue walls of the bedroom where Martha had spent her final days. It was like losing her grandmother all over again. "Eduardo, do you remember the day my Aunt Barbara came to take my grandmother out? About 6 months ago?" The doorman's expression darkened. "I do. Your grandmother seemed not herself that day. Very confused. She kept asking for you, but your aunt said you were busy. I didn't think that sounded right, so I called your cell, but it went to voicemail." Sarah remembered. She'd been at a doctor's appointment herself that day, one of the rare times she took care of her own health. She'd turned her phone off during the appointment and found Barbara's message afterward. "Taking Mom out for some fresh air. Don't worry about us." "Was anyone with my aunt?" Eduardo nodded. "A man in a suit." "Not your uncle. Someone official looking." "Mr. Peterson, the lawyer?" "Could be. I didn't get his name. But your grandmother seemed scared of him. She kept backing away when he tried to help her into the car." This was valuable information. Another witness to Martha's state of mind that day. "Eduardo, would you be willing to testify about what you saw? In court, if it comes to that." The doorman hesitated, glancing around as if to ensure no one was listening. "Miss Sarah, I've worked here for 25 years. Your grandmother was always good to me. She remembered my birthday every year, asked about my kids. The others, they don't even know my name." He straightened his shoulders. "Yes, I'll testify. Just tell me when and where." Sarah impulsively hugged the startled doorman. "Thank you, Eduardo. You don't know how much that means to me." As she turned to leave, Eduardo called after her. "Miss Sarah? For what it's worth, this place won't be the same without you. You belong here more than they ever will." The next day, Sarah arrived at Riverside Park 15 minutes early. The July heat was oppressive, making the air feel thick and heavy. She found a bench under a large oak tree and waited, watching children play nearby, their laughter a stark contrast to the heaviness in her heart. The park had been one of Martha's favorite places. Until her mobility became too limited, Sarah had brought her here often, pushing her wheelchair along the paths, stopping to watch the birds or enjoy an ice cream. Martha had loved being around children, saying their laughter was medicine for the soul. At precisely 3 p.m., Emma appeared, still wearing her nursing scrubs. She was a petite woman in her 50s with kind eyes that had witnessed countless end-of-life journeys. Her brown hair was streaked with gray, pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her sensible shoes spoke of long hours on her feet. "Sarah," she said, sitting down beside her. "Thank you for coming." "Emma, it's good to see you. What did you want to talk about?" Emma glanced around nervously before speaking. "I heard about the will from one of the other nurses. It's not right what they did to you. You know something, don't you?" Sarah felt her heart begin to race. "I was there that day when Barbara took your grandmother out. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was covering for another nurse who called in sick. But I saw everything." Sarah leaned forward, barely breathing. "Tell me, Barbara came with that lawyer, Mr. Peterson. Your grandmother was confused that day. She'd had a rough night. They told me they needed to discuss some papers with her privately, and I should take the afternoon off. But I didn't trust them, so I stayed in the next room." Emma described how she had pretended to leave, but actually remained in the kitchen, where she could hear everything happening in the living room. She had been concerned about Martha being without medical supervision, especially after a difficult night. "What did you hear?" Barbara was pressuring her, saying things like, "Mom, you know Sarah's just waiting for you to die so she can have your money. And she's only taking care of you because she expects to inherit everything." Horrible lies. Emma's voice shook with indignation as she recounted the conversation. How Barbara had systematically tried to turn Martha against Sarah, suggesting that Sarah was stealing Martha's medication, that she was talking to real estate agents behind Martha's back, that she complained about caring for Martha to anyone who would listen. Sarah felt sick. And Grandma believed her? She was confused, Sarah. Her medication was making her drowsy, and Barbara kept pushing. The lawyer had the papers ready. "I heard your grandmother say, 'But I promised Sarah the apartment.' And Barbara said, 'Sarah doesn't need it. She has her own place. Jason's struggling in Los Angeles, and he has a family to support." Tears of anger welled in Sarah's eyes. "Jason's never struggled a day in his life. His father pays for everything." "I know, but your grandmother wasn't herself. When I tried to intervene, Barbara threatened to report me to the agency for eavesdropping on private family matters. And I was scared of losing my job, so I backed off. I've regretted it every day since." Emma described how Martha had been almost incoherent by the time they returned from the lawyer's office, unable to remember where she'd been or what she'd done. She'd kept asking for Sarah, becoming increasingly agitated until Sarah returned home. "She loved you more than anyone, Sarah. I want you to know that. Whatever that will says, it wasn't her speaking. It was Barbara." Sarah reached out and squeezed Emma's hand. "Would you be willing to testify about what you heard?" Emma hesitated, then nodded firmly. "Yes. I should have spoken up sooner. Your grandmother loved you more than anyone, Sarah. She wouldn't have wanted this." "Thank you, Emma. You're brave to come forward." "No, you're the brave one. 10 years of caregiving. That's a kind of love most people can't even imagine. I've been a nurse for 30 years, and I've rarely seen the kind of devotion you showed your grandmother." As Emma walked away, Sarah called Michael immediately. "I have a witness," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Someone who heard everything. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and Michael built their case. They gathered Martha's medical records, which clearly documented her declining cognitive function. Dr. Reynolds, Martha's physician, readily agreed to testify, outraged when he heard about the circumstances of the will signing. Martha Wilson was in no condition to make major financial decisions 6 months ago, he stated firmly during his deposition. Her Alzheimer's had progressed to the point where she was easily confused, particularly when tired or under stress. She was highly susceptible to suggestion and manipulation. They interviewed Eduardo, the doorman, who confirmed that Martha had appeared disoriented and frightened on the day she was taken to sign the new will. They took a statement from Martha's regular physical therapist, who had noted increasing confusion in her session notes during that period. But most importantly, they had Emma's testimony about the manipulation that had occurred, corroborated by Martha's own words in her journal. Michael filed the lawsuit to contest the will, naming Barbara, Jason, and Ashley as defendants. The response was swift and vicious. Barbara hired Stanford Mitchell, one of Boston's most aggressive estate attorneys, known for his ruthless tactics and astronomical fees. Barbara's legal team claimed that Sarah was the one who had manipulated Martha for years, isolating her from the rest of the family. They painted Sarah as a greedy caregiver who was bitter about not getting what she felt entitled to. They suggested that Sarah had written the journal entries herself, imitating Martha's handwriting. "Your grandmother changed her will because she finally saw through you," Barbara hissed at Sarah during a preliminary hearing. "She realized you were just using her." The words stung, not because they were true, but because they were such a profound distortion of the truth. Sarah had given up everything for Martha, not for an inheritance, but out of love, out of a sense of duty, out of gratitude for the woman who had raised her after her parents died. The personal attacks were the hardest to bear. Each night, Sarah would return to her dusty apartment, feeling the weight of the battle crushing her. Some days, she wondered if it was worth fighting. Maybe she should just take the $10,000 and try to rebuild her life. It was during one of these moments of doubt that she received an unexpected visitor. Richard, Barbara's husband, stood awkwardly at her door one evening. "Richard, what are you doing here?" He glanced nervously over his shoulder. "Barbara doesn't know I'm here. Can I come in?" Sarah hesitated, then stepped aside to let him enter. Richard had always been the quietest member of the family, seemingly content to follow Barbara's lead in all things. A tall, thin man with prematurely gray hair and perpetually worried eyes, he had always struck Sarah as someone who had given up fighting his own battles long ago. Her apartment was small, just a living room-kitchen combination, a bedroom, and a bathroom. Richard seemed to fill the space with his nervous energy, refusing to sit down when Sarah offered. "I can't stay long," he said, declining Sarah's offer to sit. "But I wanted you to know. I'm sorry about all this. It's not right what Barbara did." "You know about it?" Sarah asked, surprised. Richard nodded, looking ashamed. "She's been planning it for months, ever since she found out Martha had left the apartment to you in her original will. She was furious, said it should stay in her side of the family." The revelation didn't surprise Sarah as much as it might have once. She had come to understand the depths of Barbara's resentment over the past few weeks. What did surprise her was Richard's willingness to betray his wife's confidence. But why now? After all these years of barely visiting? "Money troubles," Richard admitted, his shoulders slumping. "My business has been failing for years. We're nearly bankrupt. Barbara saw your grandmother's estate as our salvation." Richard owned a small import-export business that had apparently been struggling for some time. Barbara's extravagant lifestyle, the designer clothes, the luxury vacations, the country club memberships, had drained their resources. They were, Richard confessed, 3 months behind on their mortgage and maxed out on all their credit cards. "That doesn't justify what she did," Sarah said firmly. "No, it doesn't. I told her that. I told her we should sell our house, downsize, live within our means. But Barbara," he trailed off, looking defeated. "Barbara believes she deserves a certain lifestyle. She was raised that way. When she found out your grandmother had changed her will to leave you the apartment, she saw it as a theft. From her." Sarah felt a strange mix of vindication and pity. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I can't live with the guilt anymore. Barbara's obsessed with winning this case. She's even talking about destroying evidence. Old emails where Martha mentioned leaving you the apartment." "Richard, I need you to tell this to my lawyer." He shook his head quickly. "I can't testify against my wife, but..." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a USB drive. "These are copies of those emails. Barbara doesn't know I backed them up. There's also a recording of her discussing the plan with Jason before they visited Martha that day. I couldn't stop them then, but maybe this can help make things right now. Sarah took the USB drive, holding it carefully. Why, Richard? Why help me now? He looked at her with tired eyes. Because I knew your grandmother. She was a good woman who loved you very much. And because... He hesitated. Because I've spent 30 years afraid to stand up to Barbara. Maybe it's time I did at least one right thing. As Richard left, Sarah held the USB drive like it was made of gold. This could be the evidence they needed to prove conspiracy and undue influence. That night, she couldn't sleep. The USB drive contained exactly what Richard had promised. Dozens of emails between Martha and various family members over the years. In email after email to friends and relatives, Martha had expressed her intention to leave her apartment to Sarah. She's given up so much to take care of me. One email read, "It's the least I can do to ensure she has a home when I'm gone." But the most damning evidence was the audio recording, apparently made when Richard had secretly recorded a conversation between Barbara and Jason as they planned their visit to Martha. Sarah listened with growing horror as her aunt and cousin coldly discussed how to manipulate an elderly woman with dementia. She's so confused these days. She'll sign anything if we tell her Sarah's stealing from her, Barbara's voice said clearly on the recording. Are you sure Peterson is on board? Jason asked. Of course. I've been using him for years. He knows which side his bread is buttered on. The revelation that Mr. Peterson, Martha's supposed trusted attorney, was complicit in the scheme made Sarah feel physically ill. The depth of the betrayal was almost incomprehensible. The next morning, Sarah brought the USB drive to Michael's office. After reviewing the contents, he looked up with a grim smile. This is exactly what we needed, Sarah. With this evidence, we can not only contest the will, but potentially bring criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud. Criminal charges? Against my own family? Michael's expression softened. They stopped acting like family when they took advantage of a vulnerable woman with dementia. What they did wasn't just morally wrong, it was illegal. Sarah nodded slowly. Do what you need to do. I want justice for my grandmother. While you follow this extraordinary journey of betrayal and justice, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful real-life stories that will touch your heart and inspire you to stand up for what's right. The legal battle dragged on for months. Depositions were taken, motions were filed, and tensions within the family reached a breaking point. Sarah's $10,000 inheritance was quickly drained by living expenses, forcing her to take a part-time job at a local bookstore while the case proceeded. The bookstore job was a bitter reminder of her abandoned publishing career, but it also provided an unexpected solace. Surrounded by books, helping customers find their next great read, Sarah found moments of peace amid the chaos of the legal battle. Her boss, a kind-hearted woman named Eleanor, had been understanding about Sarah's situation, offering flexible hours and a sympathetic ear. My mother had Alzheimer's, Eleanor confided one slow afternoon. My sister was her caregiver. When Mom died, my brother swooped in and tried to claim everything, even though he'd visited maybe twice a year. People show their true colors when inheritance is involved. Sarah was learning that lesson all too well. The case had exposed sides of her family she'd never fully understood before. Barbara's desperate materialism, Jason's callous entitlement, the ease with which they could justify exploiting a confused, vulnerable old woman. But the case had also revealed unexpected allies. Eduardo, the doorman who had always treated Martha with respect. Emma, the nurse who had been brave enough to come forward. Richard, finding a small measure of courage after decades of acquiescence. And Michael, whose commitment to the case had grown beyond professional interest. This isn't just about money anymore, he told Sarah during a strategy session. This is about standing up for the vulnerable. Your grandmother deserves justice, and so do you. Michael had become a steady presence in Sarah's life, often working late into the night, sometimes bringing dinner to her apartment when they needed to review documents. There was a growing comfort between them, a natural rapport that might, in different circumstances, have developed into something more. But both were too focused on the case to explore those possibilities. Then came a devastating blow. 3 days before the scheduled court date, Emma called Sarah in tears. They got to me, Sarah. Barbara's lawyers. They found out about a medication error I made years ago at another job. They're threatening to report it to the nursing board if I testify. I could lose my license. Sarah's heart sank. Emma's testimony was crucial. She was the only one who had directly witnessed Barbara's manipulation of Martha during the will signing. Emma, we need your testimony. Without it, I'm sorry, Sarah. I have 3 kids to support. I can't risk my career. Sarah understood, even as despair threatened to overwhelm her. What kind of people would threaten a nurse's livelihood to cover up their own crimes? The answer was all too clear. People like Barbara and Jason, who saw others as merely obstacles to their desires. That evening, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, the case files spread across her kitchen table, wondering if she should just give up. The odds seemed increasingly stacked against her. Barbara had money, connections, a ruthless lawyer, and a willingness to destroy anyone who stood in her way. Just when things seemed darkest, Sarah found an unexpected ally. Ashley, Barbara's daughter, reached out via text. "We need to talk. Not at your place. Too risky. Meet me at the Boston Public Library tomorrow at noon." Sarah was suspicious, but curiosity won out. The next day, she arrived at the library early, choosing a seat with a clear view of the entrance. The Boston Public Library was one of the city's treasures, with its grand reading room, ornate ceilings, and hushed atmosphere of reverence for knowledge. Sarah had spent many happy hours here during her college days, losing herself in literature and dreams of becoming a writer. Ashley arrived precisely at noon, looking nervously over her shoulder before sitting across from Sarah. At 25, Ashley was the youngest of the family, always somewhat in the shadow of her more outgoing brother Jason. With her dark hair and anxious eyes, she looked more like her father Richard than her mother. "I don't have much time," Ashley said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom thinks I'm at a hair appointment." "What do you want, Ashley?" "To help you." Ashley pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a video. "I recorded this at Mom's house last week. She and Jason were discussing how to handle the case." Sarah watched in disbelief as the video showed Barbara and Jason laughing about how they had manipulated Martha and how they were going to discredit Sarah in court. "She was so confused she would have signed anything," Barbara said in the video. "All I had to do was tell her Sarah was stealing her medication. This is..." Sarah couldn't find the words. "Criminal?" Ashley suggested. "Yeah, I know. I didn't want any part of this, but Mom insisted I take the jewelry collection. I didn't realize how far they'd gone until I saw this conversation. Why are you showing me this now?" Ashley looked down. "Grandma was good to me, even though I didn't visit much. The last time I saw her, she told me how proud she was of you for taking care of her. She said you were the daughter she never had." Tears welled in Ashley's eyes. "I can't be part of this anymore." Ashley confessed that she'd always felt uncomfortable with the family's treatment of Martha, but had been too intimidated by her mother and brother to speak up. Now, seeing the extent of their deception and manipulation, she couldn't remain silent. "I want to testify," she said firmly. "I want to tell the court what I've seen and heard. I want to do the right thing, even if it means going against my family." Sarah reached across the table and squeezed Ashley's hand. "That takes a lot of courage." "Not as much as caring for Grandma for 10 years, Ashley replied. "I should have helped more. I'm sorry, Sarah." With the video evidence in hand and Ashley's willingness to testify, Michael felt confident they could win the case. "This proves conspiracy and undue influence," he told Sarah. "Combined with the medical records and Richard's emails, we have a solid case." The day of the trial arrived, and Sarah felt a strange calm as she entered the courthouse. The imposing building, with its marble columns and solemn atmosphere, seemed a fitting venue for the resolution of this painful chapter. Barbara and Jason sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, both glaring at her with undisguised hatred. Ashley was noticeably absent, planning to arrive later to testify. Barbara looked immaculate as always, in a designer suit that probably cost more than Sarah's entire wardrobe. Jason wore an expression of bored entitlement, as if the proceedings were an inconvenience rather than a reckoning. Neither acknowledged Sarah's presence. As the proceedings began, Michael presented their evidence methodically. Martha's medical records showed her cognitive decline. Dr. Reynolds testified convincingly about Martha's vulnerability to manipulation due to her Alzheimer's. Eduardo's testimony placed Barbara and Mr. Peterson at the apartment together, contradicting their earlier statements. Richard's emails revealed Martha's true intentions regarding her will. Throughout the first day of testimony, Sarah felt a growing sense of vindication. The truth was finally being heard. Martha's voice, her real voice, not the manipulated version reflected in the fraudulent will, was finally being honored. On the second day, Ashley arrived to testify, avoiding her mother's furious gaze as she took the stand. With remarkable composure, she described the atmosphere in her family home leading up to and following Martha's death. "My mother and brother viewed Grandma's estate as their right," she testified. "They spoke about her assets as if they were already theirs, even while she was still alive. They mocked Sarah's devotion, calling her a martyr and a fool for giving up her life to care for Grandma." Barbara's face contorted with rage as her daughter spoke, while Jason stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Then came the bombshell, the video Ashley had provided. As it played in the courtroom, Sarah watched Barbara's face drain of color. The video showed Barbara and Jason laughing about Martha's confusion, mimicking her disorientation, callously discussing how easy it had been to manipulate her into signing away her apartment. "She didn't even know what day it was," Barbara could be heard saying. "Peterson just put the papers in front of her, told her it was an updated medical form, and she signed. Easiest $2 million we ever made." Barbara's attorney tried to object, claiming the recording was obtained illegally, but the judge overruled him. The evidence was too damning to ignore. By the third day of the trial, the tide had clearly turned. Barbara and Jason's attorney attempted to portray Sarah as the manipulative one, suggesting she had isolated Martha from the rest of the family. But this narrative fell apart under cross-examination, as witness after witness testified to Sarah's dedication and Martha's clear intentions before her cognitive decline. After 3 days of testimony, the judge rendered his decision. This court finds clear and convincing evidence of undue influence in the creation of Martha Wilson's final will. The document dated 6 months prior to her death is hereby invalidated. The court recognizes the previous will, dated 3 years earlier, as the true expression of Mrs. Wilson's wishes. Sarah sat in stunned silence as the judge continued. Additionally, this court refers this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges of elder abuse and fraud against Barbara Carter and Jason Carter. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered to hear statements from both sides. Barbara and Jason pushed through the crowd without comment, their faces masks of fury and defeat. Sarah stood on the steps, Michael beside her, as cameras flashed. "Ms. Evans, how do you feel about the verdict?" a reporter called out. Sarah took a deep breath. This was never about money or property. It was about honoring my grandmother's true wishes and standing up against elder abuse. Too many seniors are manipulated by family members they should be able to trust. "I hope our case helps others in similar situations." As the reporters dispersed, Sarah found herself face-to-face with Ashley. "I'm proud of you," Sarah told her cousin. "What you did took real courage." "I just did what was right," Ashley replied. "Something I should have done a long time ago." In the months that followed, Sarah moved into her grandmother's apartment. The first few nights were difficult. Everywhere she looked, she saw Martha's face, heard her laugh, felt her presence. But gradually, the pain of loss was replaced by warm memories. The apartment itself seemed to welcome her back, as if relieved to have its rightful occupant. Sarah made a few changes, repainting the kitchen the sunny yellow Martha had always wanted but never gotten around to, updating the ancient plumbing that had given them so much trouble, replacing the worn carpet in the hallway with hardwood that matched the rest of the apartment. But she kept the essential character of the place intact, honoring Martha's taste and presence. Barbara and Jason both pled guilty to reduced charges of fraud to avoid jail time. They were sentenced to community service and ordered to pay substantial fines. The family was irreparably fractured, but Sarah found she didn't mourn that loss as much as she might have expected. Some relationships, she had learned, were better left behind. Ashley, who had been granted immunity in exchange for her testimony, reached out to Sarah with a hesitant olive branch. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said when they met for coffee, "but I'd like a chance to be family again. The right way this time." Sarah wasn't ready to forgive completely, but she recognized Ashley's courage in coming forward. "It will take time," she told her cousin, "but it's a start." With her inheritance secure, Sarah faced a pivotal question: what to do with the rest of her life? At 32, she was still young enough to rebuild a career, to pursue dreams that had been put on hold during her caregiving years. The publishing industry had changed dramatically in her absence, but her love of books and storytelling remained constant. After much thought, Sarah decided to use part of her inheritance to establish the Martha Wilson Foundation for Elder Rights, dedicated to providing legal assistance to seniors facing manipulation and abuse. She hired Michael as the foundation's legal counsel, a role he eagerly accepted. "This is the kind of law I always wanted to practice," he told her, "making a real difference in people's lives." The foundation quickly gained attention, as elder abuse cases were woefully underrepresented in the legal system. Sarah found herself speaking at conferences, advocating for stronger protections for seniors with cognitive impairments, and connecting with others who had faced similar battles. She also returned to her master's program, focusing her thesis on elder care policy. Her professors were impressed by her practical experience and passionate advocacy. What had once been an academic pursuit had become a deeply personal mission. 1 year after the trial, Sarah hosted a memorial dinner on what would have been Martha's 87th birthday. Melissa was there, along with Michael, who had become more than just her lawyer, Emma and her children, Mr. Johnson, Eduardo the doorman, and even Ashley. They shared stories about Martha, laughed about her quirks, and celebrated her life. Martha had been a woman of strong opinions and gentle wisdom, someone who found joy in small pleasures: a good book, a cup of properly brewed tea, the sound of children playing in the park. She had faced her final illness with courage and grace, rarely complaining despite the indignities of age and disease. She had taught Sarah about resilience, about dignity, about the importance of standing up for what was right. As Sarah looked around the table, she realized something profound. The inheritance that truly mattered wasn't the apartment or the money. It was the capacity for love, for sacrifice, for standing up for what was right. Qualities Martha had exemplified and passed on to her. "To Grandma," Sarah said, raising her glass, "who taught us all what really matters." "To Martha," the others echoed. That night, after everyone had left, Sarah sat on the balcony overlooking the city lights. She held her grandmother's favorite teacup, the finest piece from the porcelain collection. "We did it, Grandma," she whispered to the night sky. "We made things right." The stars seemed to twinkle in response, and Sarah felt a sense of peace wash over her. The battle had been painful, but necessary. Martha's legacy, her true legacy, had been preserved. 2 years later, Sarah stood in the community center named after her grandmother, cutting the ribbon at its grand opening. The Martha Wilson Senior Center would provide advocacy, companionship, and resources for elderly residents of Boston. The center was housed in a renovated brownstone just a few blocks from Martha's apartment. It featured comfortable meeting spaces, a legal aid office, support groups for caregivers, and social activities for seniors. It was everything Martha would have loved: warm, welcoming, and practical. Michael stood beside Sarah, now her fiancé, having proposed just a month earlier. Their professional relationship had gradually evolved into something deeper, built on mutual respect and shared values. Michael understood, better than most, the depths of Sarah's grief and the magnitude of her sacrifice. He had stood by her throughout the legal battle and beyond, offering not just legal counsel, but emotional support. "She would be so proud of you," he said, squeezing her hand as photographers captured the moment. "I hope so," Sarah replied, smiling through tears. The center represented everything Martha had valued: community, dignity, and respect for elders. It was Sarah's way of ensuring her grandmother's legacy lived on. As part of the opening ceremony, Sarah unveiled a portrait of Martha that would hang in the entrance. It showed her grandmother as Sarah remembered her best: smiling, eyes bright with wisdom and humor, before illness had dimmed her light. "My grandmother taught me that family isn't just about blood," Sarah told the gathered crowd. "It's about who shows up, who stays, who loves without conditions or expectations." The crowd included many faces that had become familiar over the past 2 years. Clients the foundation had helped, caregivers seeking support, advocates for elder rights. They nodded in recognition of a truth many of them had learned the hard way. Life had come full circle. The woman who had once given up everything to care for her grandmother was now helping others do the same, but with support and resources she never had. That evening, as Sarah and Michael walked home through the park where she had met with Emma years ago, they spotted an elderly woman struggling with her groceries. Without hesitation, they both moved to help her. "Thank you, dears," the woman said, reminding Sarah so much of Martha that her heart ached. "It's not often young people notice us old folks anymore." "My grandmother taught me to always notice," Sarah replied softly. Later, as they prepared dinner in what was now their shared home, Sarah found herself opening the cabinet where she kept Martha's porcelain. She carefully took out a teacup and saucer. "What are those for?" Michael asked. "I think it's time to start using them," Sarah said. "Grandma would have wanted that. These weren't meant to sit behind glass. They were meant to be part of life's special moments." That night, they sipped tea from Martha's precious cups, and Sarah shared stories of her grandmother that she hadn't been able to tell before without crying. Now, the memories brought smiles more often than tears. "I sometimes wonder what I would have done if they had gotten away with it," Sarah admitted. "If the will had stood and I'd lost everything." "But you didn't," Michael reminded her. "You fought back. You honored your grandmother in the best possible way. It wasn't just me. It was everyone who stood up for the truth. Emma, Eduardo, Ashley, even Richard in his way. That's how justice usually works," Michael said. "Not through one person's heroics, but through many people choosing to do the right thing, often at personal cost." The battle over the will had changed Sarah forever. She had lost her naivety about family, but gained something more valuable: the knowledge that she was stronger than she ever imagined. She had faced betrayal and fought back. She had turned personal pain into purpose. As she fell asleep that night, Sarah thought about the long journey from that rainy day in Mr. Peterson's office to now. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely. There would always be a scar where her trust in family had been broken, but scars meant healing had taken place. The Martha Wilson Foundation was thriving, helping dozens of seniors each month navigate legal challenges and family conflicts. Sarah had assembled a team of attorneys, social workers, and advocates who shared her passion for elder justice. Emma had joined the foundation as their outreach coordinator, using her nursing experience to identify seniors at risk. Richard, seeking redemption after his role in Barbara's scheme, volunteered his accounting skills to help elderly clients manage their finances safely. Sarah's story had even inspired state legislators to strengthen laws against elder financial abuse, closing loopholes that had allowed too many cases to go unpunished. 3 years after winning her case, Sarah found herself sitting across from a young woman whose story mirrored her own, a devoted granddaughter fighting against family members who had manipulated her grandfather into changing his will. "I don't know if I can do this," the woman said, echoing Sarah's own doubts from years ago. "They have so much money, so many lawyers." Sarah reached across the table and took the woman's hand. "You're not alone anymore," she said. "And neither was your grandfather when you were caring for him. That matters more than you know right now." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Everyone keeps telling me to just let it go, that it's not worth the fight. Only you can decide that," Sarah replied. "But ask yourself this. If your grandfather could speak now, what would he want? Would he want the people who manipulated him to profit from it? Or would he want the truth to be heard?" As she helped yet another family find justice, Sarah realized that Martha's true legacy wasn't the apartment or the beach house, or even the foundation that bore her name. It was the ripple effect of love and care that continued long after she was gone. That night, as she placed fresh flowers beside Martha's photograph, Sarah whispered, "Thank you for teaching me that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones most worth fighting." The next morning, she received news that Barbara had reached out, asking to meet. After years of bitterness and legal battles, her aunt was facing a cancer diagnosis and seeking reconciliation. Sarah wasn't sure she was ready, but she remembered something Martha had told her long ago. Forgiveness isn't about freeing the other person, dear. It's about freeing yourself. Maybe it was time to take that final step in her healing journey. Not for Barbara's sake, but for her own. As Sarah stood on the threshold of yet another challenging chapter, she felt a familiar presence, as if Martha was standing beside her, encouraging her forward. "One day at a time," she whispered to herself, Martha's favorite saying when life seemed overwhelming. One day at a time, she had cared for her grandmother. One day at a time, she had fought for justice. One day at a time, she had rebuilt her life. And one day at a time, she would continue Martha's legacy of love, courage, and compassion. Thank you for following this extraordinary journey of betrayal, justice, and healing. If this story touched your heart as deeply as it touched mine in telling it, please leave a like, share it with someone special, and subscribe to our channel. In the comments, tell me what story of transformation you'd like to see in our next video. Your participation is essential as we continue to bring these inspiring journeys to life.